Good evening. On behalf of the commissioners and staff, I would like to welcome you to the December 16th, 2021 City of Roseville Planning Commission meeting. At this time, if you could all put your electronic devices on silent. Agendas are available at the end of the staff table. If you plan to speak at tonight's meeting, please complete a blue card and return it to the staff table. As a reminder, Planning Commission meetings are broadcast live and replayed throughout the week on Consolidated Communications and Comcast. I will now call the meeting to order. Lupi, could I please have a roll call?
Yes, Commissioner Brashears.
Here.
Commissioner Caparuso.
Here.
Commissioner Covington is absent, excused. Commissioner Hagenjos.
Here.
Commissioner Pryor.
Here.
Vice Chair Martin.
Here.
And Chair Jensen.
Here. Commissioner Martin, could you lead us in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Lupi, could you please begin staff introductions?
Yes, good evening, Commissioners. Lupi Nelson, Recording Secretary.
Good evening, Commissioners. Joe Speaker, Assistant City Attorney.
Good evening, Chair Jensen and Commissioners. Greg Bitter, Planning Manager.
Good evening, Chair Jensen and Commissioners. Derek Ogden, Senior Planner.
Good evening, Chair Jensen and Commissioners. Kenny Shallow, Associate Planner.
Good evening, Commissioners. Mark Stout, Engineering Manager.
Thank you. And now's the time for public comment. The public comment period is the time for anyone who would like to address the Commission on any item that is not on tonight's agenda. When addressing the Commission, please state your name for the record, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Is there anyone that would like to address the Commission on any item that is not on tonight's agenda? Hearing none, I'll go ahead and close the public comment period and move on to the consent calendar. The consent calendar consists of routine items that may be approved under one motion as recommended in the staff reports. However, each item may be considered separately upon a request by the audience, Planning Commission, or staff. Tonight's consent calendar consists of one item, which is the minutes from the November 18th, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. Is there anyone on the Commission or in the audience who would like to pull the minutes from the November 18th Planning Commission meeting? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar as listed?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second it.
Commissioner Martin has made the motion and Commissioner Pryor has second. Roll call, Lupi.
Commissioner Hagenjos.
Yes.
Commissioner Caparuso.
Yes.
Commissioner Pryor.
Yes.
Vice Chair Martin.
Yes.
Commissioner Brashears.
Yes.
And Chair Jensen.
Yes, the motion is approved. Next on the agenda is requests and presentations. Before I begin, I want to review the meeting procedures. First, we will hear the staff presentation. Then I'll take questions from the Commission. I will then open the public hearing, and the applicant will make a presentation. I will then open the public comment, and the public will have an opportunity to speak. I will then close public comment, and the applicant will be given an opportunity to provide a rebuttal. I will then close the public hearing. The Commission may ask questions of staff, and finally, the Commission will consider the item and make a decision based on the information provided in the staff report and the testimony presented during the hearing. I want to acknowledge before we start that we have a unique situation with item 6.1. You'll notice that item 6.1 includes two geographically distinct projects, item 6.1A and item 6.1B. Because of recent changes to state housing laws regarding the downzoning of residential properties, these two projects must be considered together. Therefore, we'll hear one presentation for both items before entertaining Commissioner questions and the public hearing. The Commission will then consider the entitlements of both items with one action. The two projects listed under item 6.1 include item 6.1A, a request for a general plan amendment, rezone, tentative subdivision map, and tree permit for 360 Diamond Oak Road. For the record, it's file number PL21-0162. And item 6.1B is a request for a general plan amendment, specific plan amendment, rezone, development agreement amendment, and tentative subdivision map for 3301 Pleasant Grove Boulevard. For the record, file number PL21-0161. Kinney, could we please have your presentation?
Yes, you may. Good evening again. I'm here tonight to present the items 6.1A and 6.1B, which is the Sierra View Subdivision Project and the Sierra Vista Specific Plan Parcel WV41 Rezone Project. So I wanted to start with a brief overview of Senate Bill 330, since it's relevant to why these two projects are being presented as one item. SB 330, which is known as the Housing Crisis Act of 2019, was enacted in the 2019 legislative session and precludes the city from reducing anticipated housing density in one portion of its jurisdiction without making up for the reduction by increasing density in another area. In the case of these two projects, the applicant is proposing to reduce the number of units on infill parcel 100, which is the Sierra View subdivision site, from 168 units to 75 units, and then transferring the remaining 93 units to Sierra Vista specific plan parcels WB41 and WB31 in order to make up for the lost residential capacity at infill parcel 100. Of the 93 units, 63 will be transferred to WB41 and 30 units will be transferred to WB31. However, WB41 has a current zoning and land use designation of community commercial, so item 6.1B will be amending the zoning to small lot residential with the development standards overlay and amending the land use to medium density residential in order to accommodate the 63 units being transferred. WB31 is already zoned multifamily housing and is a high-density residential parcel that can accommodate the 30 additional units. Since SB 330 has required these consecutive actions, tonight's presentation will combine the two projects together, and the Planning Commission will be asked to take one action when considering the entitlements for both projects. This slide lists the entitlements for each project, and the Planning Commission is the approving authority for the tentative subdivision maps and tree permit, while the City Council is the approving authority for the remaining entitlements. So beginning with the Sierra View subdivision project, this site is located on a 23-acre parcel located on a portion of infill parcels 3 and 100 at 360 Diamond Oaks Road. Parcel 100 is currently zoned multifamily housing with the land use designation of medium density residential, and Parcel 3 is zoned single-family residential with the land use designation of low-density residential. The southwest portion of Parcel 100 is developed with the Sierra View townhomes, and the remainder, which is the project site, is undeveloped. The site was originally expected to be built out with subsequent phases of the townhomes, but has remained vacant. Surrounding uses include single-family residences to the east and north, Sierra View Country Club to the west, and an elementary school to the south across Shasta Street. The developer is proposing a reduced density from medium to low density in response to community requests that future development on this site consists of a fewer amount of units and larger lots to more closely align with the surrounding subdivisions. The proposed LDR designation will facilitate the development of larger lots, which will better accommodate a variety of single-story and two-story homes that will be compatible with the adjacent LDR subdivision to the east. The applicant is also requesting a rezone to amend the zoning designation of the site to small lot residential, which is considered an implementing zone for the LDR land use. Staff finds the proposed land use and zoning are appropriate and compatible with the surrounding uses. The tentative subdivision map consists of 75 single-family lots with an average lot size of 6,800 square feet. The subdivision will be gated with vehicle access from Diamond Oaks Road on the north. An emergency vehicle access only will be provided on Shasta Street to the south. The traffic study prepared for the project evaluated different access scenarios and determined that the proposed access and circulation design is the most optimal design based on site distance, traffic volumes, and safety. Because this project is reducing density on the site and building less than what was anticipated in the general plan, the project's trip generation and vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, is less than what was anticipated for the site, and there is sufficient capacity to accommodate the trips generated by the project. An Arborist Report was prepared by a certified arborist that identified a total of 323 protected oak trees on the property. Staff worked with the applicant to preserve as many of the trees to the extent feasible, but approximately 49% of the trees will require removal due to tree health or because they conflict with the proposed improvements. This amounts to 158 trees with the total aggregate diameter of approximately 2,400 inches. The remaining 165 trees will be retained and are primarily located within the power line corridors on the northern and central portions of the site, as highlighted here in green, that will remain as open space. The project will also encroach into the protected zone of 30 of the trees to remain due to proposed development activities. The applicant will comply with the compensation requirements of the Tree Preservation Ordinance through payment into the city's in lieu fee program. These program funds are used for the replanting and preservation of trees throughout the city, and the fees are calculated at a rate of $118 per inch of tree removed, and these fees are required to be paid prior to tree removal. Some residents have expressed concern over the loss of oak trees on the site and the impacts to wildlife. As required by the CEQA document prepared for the project, pre-construction nesting surveys are required to ensure that no special status nesting birds or migratory birds are harmed during tree removal or construction of any kind. So moving on to item 6.1B, which is the WB 41 rezone project. 63 of the units from parcel 100 will be transferred to WB 41, and 30 will be transferred to WB 31 to avoid a net reduction in housing units. Both parcels are currently undeveloped and are located on the western edge of the city near Santucci Boulevard and Pleasant Grove Boulevard. WB 31 is approximately 10 acres or 11 acres and has land use designation of HDR and a zoning designation of R3. WB 41 is approximately 10 acres and has a land use and zoning designation of community commercial. The parcels are surrounded by residential land uses and across, one slide back. Next slide. Because WB 41 is currently a commercial parcel, the applicant is requesting a general plan and specific plan amendment to change the land use to medium density residential and a rezone to change the zoning to small lot residential with the development standards overlay. Consistent with the City Council's adopted guidelines for the conversion of non-residential land uses, fiscal impact analysis was prepared, which demonstrated that the land use change from CC to MDR will not have a negative fiscal impact to the city's general fund on an annual basis. In addition, 3 studies were completed to determine the feasibility of developing WB 41 as a commercial site. These studies include a retail market analysis, a highest and best use study, and a retail feasibility traffic analysis. These studies are included as attachments to the staff report, but in summary, the studies concluded that WB 41 is an inferior commercial site and found that residential is the highest and best use. The reasons for this is due to its limited 180-degree trade area and because the project would not generate enough vehicle pass-by trips to make a retail development feasible on this site. It was also determined that Sierra Vista parcel WB 42 is a superior commercial site given it's more centrally located within the plan area and is larger at about 14.5 acres. WB 42 is located approximately half a mile east of the site at the southwest corner of Westbrook and Pleasant Grove Boulevards, which are 2 major commute corridors, so that site is a much larger trade area draw, making WB 41 infeasible to support a neighborhood-serving commercial center. The traffic study prepared for the project found that the proposed rezone would result in substantially fewer trips generated by the property because a retail use has a higher trip generation rate when compared to residential. The proposed rezone would also reduce VMT for both the specific plan area and the city as a whole. In regards to utilities, the proposed land use changes and unit allocations proposed with both items 6.1A and 6.1B will result in less water demand and less sanitary sewer flows than what was previously anticipated. The tentative subdivision map for WB 41 will have 63 single-family lots with a typical lot size of 45 feet wide by 80 feet long. All lots meet the applicable RSDS standards. Access will be provided by Daylight Drive on the eastern side of the parcel, and the subdivision will also have connectivity with the adjacent MDR subdivision to the south. The city's engineering division and fire department staff determined the map provides adequate street widths for circulation and emergency response. The project includes a second amendment of the Westbrook Development Agreement, which covers parcels WB 41 and WB 31. The DA will be amended to reflect the proposed land use change, unit transfers, and the elimination of the bus transfer station and park and ride lot on WB 41. The DA will be amended to specify that citywide park fees for the transferred units, which are paid at the time of building permit issuance, may be applied to the construction of any citywide park. Lastly, the DA amendment includes language regarding the developer dedication of a 5-acre portion of parcel W60B to the city, with an option for the city to purchase an additional 15 acres, and specifies that the dedication will occur before June 30th, 2022. Because the two projects are related, both projects were evaluated in a combined CEQA document. However, each action requires a different type of CEQA analysis based on its location and previous planning conducted for the site. For the Sierra View subdivision project, an initial study leading to a mitigated negative declaration was prepared, and site-specific mitigation measures are required to ensure less than significant impacts. For parcels WB41 and WB31, an addendum to the Sierra Vista specific plan EIR was prepared, which did not identify any new environmental impacts. The CEQA document also includes a cumulative considerations analysis, which looks at the combined effects of the two projects. During the 30-day public review period of the document, a total of 3 letters from the public were received. These comments, along with staff's responses, are included with the Planning Commission staff report. For public outreach, early notification of both projects was posted on the Arcona website and the city's Projects of Interest website. The developer also installed signs on the properties notifying the public of the projects. The public hearing notice was published in the Sacramento Bee, mailed to property owners within a 300-foot radius and interested persons, and also posted on the Arcona website. Prior to submitting a formal project application to the city, the property owner of Parcel 100, Sierra View Land Company, and the developer, West Park Communities, held 3 informational meetings with residents in the surrounding area in November 2020 and in March 2021. The purpose of those meetings was to provide information on the project and for residents to provide input on the initial plans. The initial plan for the site proposed smaller lot sizes with the greater number of units. However, residents expressed concerns with the density and lot sizes. So as a result of this feedback, the plans were revised to the current proposal of 75 units with the lesser amount of units and larger lots. More recently, West Park Communities presented the projects at the Sierra View Neighborhood Association meeting in October of 2021. Approximately 50 people, including residents of the Diamond Oaks neighborhood, were in attendance, and residents asked questions on impacts to traffic, whether environmental review would be conducted, and what types of home plans would be offered. Since publication of the staff report, staff has received 3 letters in support of the project, which were provided to the Planning Commission earlier today. So in conclusion, staff finds the projects comply with SB 330 and the required findings of fact for both projects can be made. The projects are consistent with the goals, policies, and standards of the general plan, zoning ordinance, and for item 6.1B, the Sierra Vista specific plan. At this time, staff recommends the Planning Commission take the actions listed on this slide. And that concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Kenny. So now's the time for the commission to ask any questions of staff, and we'll go ahead and start at this end. Commissioner Hagen-Yost, if you have any questions.
At this time, no.
Commissioner Pryor?
Yes, I have a question. Thank you very much, Kenny, for your great presentation. I have a question on one of the section about the trees and the loss of, is it 49% of the trees on the site? The offset of that, the money goes into the general fund for trees or not? Or
It's a tree preservation fund.
okay, tree preservation fund. And how is that fund used? Is it used in that area or?
I believe it's within
General
the city
city.
as a whole in the open space.
Yeah, so the native tree fund and the non-native tree fund, both of the mitigations are handled by the city's Parks Department. And so they typically do a lot of projects within the city's open space areas, within parks, but it is throughout the whole city.
Okay,
Yes.
good. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Just a follow-up. In terms of the use of the land as it was designated prior to this, if this goes through, there was plans for this area to be developed, and there would have been removal of trees at some point
Correct.
in whatever way the land was developed, correct?
Correct. Mhm.
Commissioner Martin?
Thanks, Kenny. Appreciate your presentation. I guess it's more of a general concern. This is not the first time we've been asked to change a commercial to a residential. And I appreciate the information you presented with the distance of the adjacent commercial site and some of the reasons why the other commercial site's a better use than this one. It helps explain and give us some insight of some reasons why that change is being processed or requested. But I've just always had that concern. This is not the first time we've changed commercial, and there is nothing out there besides a restaurant and a cafe shop. But we've also tried to put a gas station in there, and we've had a lot of complaints with adjacent neighbors too, so there's always a battle back and forth. But I do really appreciate your in-depth information on the commercial sites. So just more of an information item.
Commissioner Caparuso?
I just want to echo those comments. I have the same concerns. I don't have any questions at this time. I'll have more at the end, I think, of the presentation. I do appreciate the public outreach, kind of this sheet that lays out everything that's taken place. That's very helpful to us. I don't know if that was from you or the applicant, but I appreciate that. Thank you.
Commissioner Brashears?
Thank you. Kenny, thank you for that presentation. Very thorough. My concerns, questions have been asked and I think adequately addressed. I agree, though. I do like this summary of public outreach. So at this time, I have no further questions.
Thank you. I do have a couple questions related to the state housing law, and I know it goes into detail in the staff report, but I want to just make sure I understand it. So the law as it exists today is based on our RENA numbers that were recently approved. Is that correct?
It's not necessarily associated with RENA. It is just an overall general regulation that the State Housing Crisis Act, they don't want jurisdictions to decrease the availability of housing. So they don't want to see sites that are designated for housing, whatever those densities are, high density, medium density, low density. They don't want to see them downzoned and those units lost, or the potential for those units lost.
So it's a
no
really
net loss.
It's
a no net loss policy is what it is. So
okay.
Yeah, exactly.
And my other, and reading through the staff reports, which again was very well done, what exists today with the zoning, if an applicant came in with the request to develop at that intensity, the city's ability to comment on that is somewhat restricted. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's an absolutely fair statement. We would, and you've had projects before you over the last couple of years where we've started adding in more language on some of the state legislation regarding the ability to deny housing projects or affect housing projects to the point where you would reduce the potential for units. So hypothetically, if the applicants came in and wanted to build a medium density project, the commission, the fact that you would be reducing units could not legally be a reason. You could not use that as a reason to deny the project. So absolutely. I mean, it's the state has, I think I've mentioned this before, put handcuffs on the city to a certain degree regarding housing projects.
Okay. And then the last part of my question is, so by this action of allowing this transfer, which moves these units, does the city have a little more flexibility in design comments related to the project than we may have if it was came in with basically a vested right to a certain number of units and you meet the standards and you're there, where because this is allowing that transfer, does it give a little bit more flexibility?
I think it does give a little bit more flexibility, especially if you look at avoiding tree removals. So this project obviously would have fewer tree removals than if you built, I think, what was the number, 160 units, or that's what's been approved, or that's what the density has been approved at the maximum. I mean, there would be a range that they could build. But we would probably see more tree removals. I think the traffic impacts, it would be a little bit trickier on the traffic. For instance, there's the emergency vehicle access on the southern portion of the site, and I think there were some site condition issues, the elementary school, curvature of the road. There are a bunch of factors that led to the conclusion that wouldn't be a good site for a full driveway. Well, if you doubled the number of units, I don't know that the traffic would, that balance of whether or not that the Diamond Oaks Road could handle 75 units versus 150 units. We may have needed a secondary full entrance and access point. So those are some of the flexibilities that by moving these units, it allowed us to look at the design and try and ultimately reduce the impact to that neighborhood.
Thank you. Okay, I'll go ahead and open up the public hearing, and I'd like to invite the project representative for this item to address the commission. Marcus.
Mr. Chairman and members of the commission, Marcus LaDuca, 3200 Douglas Boulevard here in Roseville. On behalf of the applicant and the property owners for each of the projects on tonight's agenda, I'm pleased to be before you with the recommendation from your staff for approval of 2 new residential projects, one in the infill area and then one in the Sierra Vista specific plan. Before I begin, I did want to express our project team's appreciation to the various city departments for all their work on the applications and getting us to this point, particularly to Kenny Shallow for leading the staff team in the review and processing of these projects. Our project team also wishes to express our appreciation to our neighbors adjacent to the Sierra View Country Club property, and particularly to the historic Sierra Vista Neighborhood Association for all their input and willingness to engage with us and discuss the project with us, this new project coming into their neighborhood. Their input help make for a better project, frankly, and it's, again, a project that is more consistent with those surrounding neighborhoods. The staff report before you, that's a thick stack of paper, and tonight's presentation very thoroughly cover our requested entitlements, the environmental documents and review for both projects, as well as the very few public comments we've had up to this point tonight. I'd like to focus on a couple things. One is the project team's outreach efforts to the community, and then focus on the proposed change in land use to parcel WB41 in the Sierra Vista specific plan. In terms of our outreach, I handed out earlier the summary of our outreach efforts. Again, we was both in person in meetings and also electronically with the web page that was established for the project last March and is updated, and then people are responded to as people would contact the project team. Again, I just wanted to give you an example of the amount of time and effort that went into try to seeking public input and engagement. To go into that in a little bit more detail, at our original meetings in November of 2020, a little over a year ago, we explained the history of the Sierra View property and what the long-standing zoning allowed on the property in terms of residential development. It has been zoned that way for many decades. And that namely is the 168 units described in the staff report. The project we had initially presented to the community at several meetings last November had not yet been submitted to the city. It contained 138 single-family lots, about 20% less than what the zoning allowed. Because of those lot sizes that would be involved with a medium-density residential project, all the homes in that project would have been required to be 2 stories in height. That project also had full vehicular access at the southern end to Shasta Street across from Spandrew Elementary School, and it also had proposed RV parking under the power line corridor in the middle of the project. That version of the project with that number of units would have required removal of a substantial majority of all the trees on the site. The good part of that was we didn't need a rezone or general plan amendment. We didn't submit that application to the city with that version of the project because we were truly interested in receiving input from the community and from our neighbors. What we heard from the community last November very clearly was that, one, residents did not want residential lots of a size significantly different from their existing properties. Second, they did not support the idea of a neighborhood with all 2-story homes, especially the homes on our eastern boundary of the property and adjacent to that part of the property. Our neighbors did not like the idea of the project having vehicular access to Shasta across the street from Spandrew Elementary because of the potential traffic circulation issues during morning drop-off and afternoon pickup from the school. And they certainly didn't like a layout that removed nearly all of the trees or a substantial majority of the trees on the site. With that input in hand, we basically had to go back to the drawing board. It was pretty clear to us that with the existing zoning and the existing general plan land use designation of medium density residential, we would not be able to come up with a project acceptable to our neighbors, as the project was already at the very minimum of lots under the land use category for medium density residential. We couldn't go below 138 without triggering a general plan amendment and rezone. So we realized we had to go to low density residential and process a rezone and a general plan amendment. We went back to the community in March with a 77 lot version with larger lots that would allow for some single story homes to be placed on lots, depending of course on the lot size of a particular lot, and also the homes to be situated as the market would determine in terms of a builder coming in and attracting buyers to the site. Also, with that development footprint of those number of lots, we were able to preserve a little over half of the trees on the site. The project circulation pattern was also significantly revised. We removed vehicular access to Shasta Street, with access being limited to emergency vehicles only, plus pedestrian and cyclists at that location. Subsequent to that meeting, we further refined the project down to the 75 lots that you see in the staff report. Again, we presented, as we presented that in March with the 77 lots, it was much more acceptable to people, and we then began the formal planning process with the city filing an application based on that refined version of the 75 lots. As noted in the staff report, the majority of the lots that are in the 75 lot project exceed the minimum in the RS zone, so it wasn't that we were trying to cram in everything at the minimum. There's a number of larger lots. The average lot size is 6,800 square feet, but again, over half the lots are over the minimum for the zoning. However, as we've just heard it somewhat at length, this also triggered, with the general plan amendment and rezone, triggered the provisions of SB 330 and the state requirement for no net loss in residential capacity. And those are the terms used in the statute. So with that, we needed to figure out what to do with these additional 93 units. West Park then examined other property they own in the city and looked at a parcel on the very western edge of the city that could take some or all of the extra 93 units created if, in fact, the 75 lot project was approved. We understand, I've been doing work in the Roseville for 31 years. There's always a concern in Roseville with the loss of commercially zoned land, particularly in the western portion of the city. That is always a concern, and I'll go into that a little bit more detail as we looked at that. However, if you look at the West Plan and West Roseville in general, there is literally no one more cognizant about getting commercial land use built in West Roseville than West Park. They were one of the two master developers in the West Plan from its very inception, from the very idea of having a West Plan. And their years of efforts have resulted now in development of the Village Center with a coffee shop and a restaurant that have been quite popular with West Plan area residents. When we first brought the idea of changing the land use on parcel 41 to the city several years ago, even before the vision for the Sierra property was even brought into focus, staff's response was negative. And what followed then was 3 years of marketing by the West Park team to commercial retailers to try to get someone to attract to come to parcel WB 41, particularly a grocery store. That's been one of the great needs on the west side, and so the idea was hopefully to bring a grocery store. West Park folks made a number of concessions and made several aggressive offers to retailers, and what they got back was either silence or rejections. Quite simply, and if you look at a map, you'll see that there was one slide that showed other commercial parcels, but there are 5 community commercial parcels on Pleasant Grove Boulevard to the west of WB 41. Again, looking at this site, WB 41, relative to those other sites, this is simply not a viable commercial site now, or frankly in the last 9 years since the Westbrook portion of Sierra Vista was approved. To put this into perspective of trying to get community commercial developed in this part of the city, there is a community commercial parcel at the northeast corner of Pleasant Grove and Fitiment in the Del Webb specific plan. That's been owned by Safeway, so owned by a grocery retailer for at least 20 years, yet it hasn't been developed, and they have owned it all that time. 2 other sites in the Sierra Vista specific plan, one of which Kenny showed, parcel WB 42 at the southwest corner of Pleasant Grove Boulevard in Westbrook, is also owned by West Park. And there's another parcel just further to the east of that, parcel JM 41 at the southwest corner of Fitiment and Pleasant Grove, owned by John Moyer, are much better situated to be able to attract a grocery store, or if not a grocery store, some other type of retail use to that portion of Roseville. But the city was still saying you haven't proven your case. So to see if the marketplace thought the same way as we did, West Park engaged 3 different consultants to analyze parcel WB 41 to see whether the site would be, in fact, an attractive property to attract retail uses of the site. First, Intellectrics analyzed WB 41 for its potential for a grocery supermarket. To summarize briefly, and I know you have the report in your packet, but it was rather lengthy with lots of charts. That study concluded that grocery stores have a series of metrics that the site needs to have. It's a must-have. It's not like, well, we'd like to have them. Without that, a grocery store simply doesn't locate on the site. And parcel WB 41 doesn't meet any of those metrics. While parcel WB 42, the other West Park property that half a mile away there on Pleasant Grove Boulevard, meets those metrics. WB 42 is more centrally located in Sierra Vista, and it has a 360-degree trade area around it. Parcel W 41 is at the far western edge of the city, has only a 180-degree trade area draw, and on the other side of it to the west are orchards and a future solar farm. Pleasant Grove Boulevard, again, in this property, does access to Highway 65 eventually on the far side of the city in north central. But Westbrook Boulevard will also connect to Baseline Road, and then from there on to Highway 99, and that'll connect to the south in the next year or so, and will eventually connect to the north to Placer Parkway on Westbrook through the Amaruso Ranch Pacific Plan to an interchange planned at that location. WB 41 has no major north-south connection in terms of an arterial for people to access it, as it is unknown when Santucci Boulevard will be connected to the south to Baseline Road, and there is not a single plan anywhere, whether it's in the city of Roseville or the county, to connect to the north in terms of that roadway have a connection to the north to any other a major arterial. West Park next went to MXD development strategist to do what's called a highest and best use analysis for WB 41. Its conclusion first was that Roseville appears to have an excess of community commercial sites. Its detailed analysis of WB 41, then looking at even non-grocery uses, was that WB 41 it fronts on streets that at that location is projected to have fairly low traffic volumes. It lacks also complementary development nearby, such as job centers, like you would have at in the old HP site, or some other major draw to the area. And it would be significantly challenged as a retail site of any kind, particularly when you compare it to these other sites, including WB 42. also the JM 41, the Moyer property there at Fitterman and Pleasant Grove. There's an additional site that's also would be present a challenge to commercial development, WB 41, and that is the marketplace there at Fitterman and Baseline Road, which this commission approved in the last couple of years, including a Stage 2 permit to be able to develop that, which will have both big box retail as well as other retail uses. That becomes a greater challenge for something at the very edge of the city. The final conclusion of that study was the highest and best use was single-family residential. That study also looked to see whether other uses, not retail, office development, a hotel on the site would work. And again, it found those be lacking in terms of the characteristics that either hotel operators or office developers would look for in order to locate those uses on that site. Finally, Fair and Peers did an analysis of the travel demand for the trips to be generated around WB 41 and found that compared to retail centers along major arterials throughout Roseville, the retail development on parcel 41 WB 41 would simply not attract sufficient retail trips for a developer to be able to invest and build a retail development, compared not only to existing commercial sites in the city, but also other commercial sites that I've mentioned. In conclusion, parcel WB 41 is the site that will not be successful in developing as a retail site, potentially for many years, if ever. Particularly compared to those nearby competing sites, which we're also trying to get developed in the Sierra Vista specific plan, as well as in the West Roseville specific plan. The Commission has before it two projects that can address two challenges. One is developing an infill site that's been zoned for decades for homes with residential uses at a density that's acceptable to the community, to our neighbors. At the same time, comply with the state law by transferring the extra units from that parcel, if we create the down zone to low-density residential, to a site that by removing it as a potential competing site actually makes the other community commercial sites in Sierra Vista more competitive. With that, we would ask for your final action on the tentative maps and the tree permit and your recommendation for approval on the other entitlements tonight. As presented to you by your staff and as also conditioned by the various city departments. Our project team and representatives from Sierra View Country Club are here to answer any questions. We would ask Mr. Chairman at the end of the public hearing to have the chance to get up and address any comments or questions directed at the projects from the public. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Commission, do you have any questions for the project applicant? Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and open up the public comment period. This is the time for members of the public to speak on the project. Before we start, could I see a show of hands of how many people will want to speak on the project so we get a sense of it? Looks like 3. Others can jump up later if you want to. Please remember you're limited to 5 minutes, and if you could please state your name for the record. So at this point, please come forward and provide your comments.
Go first.
Thank you.
Commissioners, Mr. Chairman, my name is Jane Massione. I live at 1004 Shasta Street. I live on the eastern border of parcel 100. And I am obligated to disclose that I am not here on behalf of my employer. Whenever I speak in public, I must disclose that I am here as a private citizen and not speaking on behalf of my employer. I'm here to remind you that you are the responsible agency. You are the responsible party under CEQA. You know that. I didn't know where the EIR that's mentioned, there's a 6th addendum to an EIR. I don't know where that is to find it, to look at it. So I worked only from what was provided on the website with the Planning Commission notice of this meeting. Now, I'm here to urge you to exercise your responsibility as the responsible party under CEQA to conduct your own environmental review, particularly with respect to Parcel 100. It has wetlands, seasonal wetlands, vernal pools, existing streams, intermittent streams, and the interesting part about the negative mitigated declaration, which I'm just going to call it the declaration, is that it really presents a false dichotomy between the requirements of SB 330 and CEQA. There's no dichotomy. There's no need to balance, as they say on page 5, the requirements. They say the situation is a novel one for the city. The city is not aware of any jurisdiction that has yet attempted to balance the requirements of CEQA and the mandates of 330, though there may be such jurisdictions, without guidance from the state as to how best to jointly navigate these statutes. Well, the state actually already gave you that guidance. In SB 330, it says nothing in this section, actually, neither shall anything in this section be construed to relieve the local agency from making one or more of the findings required pursuant to CEQA. In other words, yeah, we want you to pay attention to how you're zoning. We want you to not, as a knee-jerk, the way it had been used, automatically exclude lower income, more dense housing in favor of less dense housing. But we don't want you to violate environmental laws doing it. So when the mitigated declaration says you have to balance, what does the word balance mean? Well, if the two are hand in hand, there should be no balancing, right? So you're obligated to prove only those that meet the CEQA requirements. If it requires balancing, that means that, gosh, we've got to violate CEQA in order to get what we want to develop. Now, what is it that's the problem? I believe it's the wetlands. 2 other developers looked at this property and said, no, we can't do it in the past. And I didn't know about the 72-hour requirement to present visual materials, so I am not actually presenting these, but I have offered in my letter to the council, which was one of the 3 letters that were submitted. I was not necessarily really in favor of the proposal because of this environmental problem on Parcel 100. On August 27th, Sierra View West Park decided to put a backhoe on back right opposite my house in the seasonal wetlands and dig a retention pond and altered the drainage of the property. I believe they did so without any lake and stream bed alteration agreements from the State Department of Fish and Wildlife. And the reason I believe that is because in the declaration itself, they say we will need to obtain permits, which to me says that they haven't yet. So why would they spend the money to put a backhoe behind my house for 2 days, digging a retention pond and spreading the dirt over the vernal pools and the seasonal wetlands that are there? If they were trying to regrade the property, why didn't they just bring in graders? Well, they couldn't do that because the project's not approved. But here they are with the backhoe, and here's a retention pond now behind my home instead of a seasonal wetland. Now, I have pictures from March of this year showing ducks and mallard ducks and geese nesting in those seasonal wetlands. And the declaration says, if we find any existing nests, we're going to remove them.
Jane, we're almost to 5 minutes. I'll give you a little bit more time, but if you could wind up your comments.
I will be glad to. Okay, so the problem is if they've already destroyed the nesting sites, they're not going to find any, right? So I'm urging you all, please exercise your authority as the responsible party under CEQA and initiate your own independent environmental review, understanding that the property has already been altered. All the drainage in the property has been altered by backhoe.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
There were several questions in there. We'll go ahead and wait for staff to respond to that till we hear all the questions, and we'll do that comprehensively at the end. So anyone else like to speak on this item? Mr. Allen?
Hi, how are you, Rob?
I'm doing fine.
Gray Allen. Up until a week ago, I lived at 306 Diamond Oaks Road, lived there for 43 years, raised my family there, and I've always been very fond of the Diamond Oaks neighborhood. It's a great place for families, a lot of great access to the city. And also during that time, I served on the Planning Commission for 8 years, and so I realized the kind of things you need to consider. And I'm thinking about this new project going in there on the Sierra View property, and I think it would really add something to the neighborhood. As a former resident, I think I would have been very pleased to have that there, and so I'm very much in support of it, and that's basically what I have to say about it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience like to speak on this item?
Hi, good evening. Zach Sevilla. I am a resident in the Diamond Oaks neighborhood. I did have a few questions, and I'll just pose my questions here, and then staff can respond afterwards. It's been said multiple times tonight that the project was zoned for X number of units. My question is, did the project ever have environmental clearance before, or was it just zoned for a certain number of units? Because I think there is a difference if we're talking about approving a project versus a general zoning that's applied to this area. Secondly, I suspect that if the project applicant was to submit their application based on that number of units, it probably would not have been approved by the city. I do appreciate the work that the applicant put into coordinating with the neighborhood. I think that's admirable. But based on the comments from Mr. Bitter earlier, if there was 150 or more units submitted, it sounds like there would be more impacts to the neighborhood and potentially not an application that would be approved. Lastly, I want to just ask that in the environmental document, I noticed that the VMT analysis shows that it's less than significant, but it's a comparison against what the project was originally zoned for. And I don't know if that's the correct way of looking at that. I would think that the VMT analysis should look at what is the impact on the project, not a comparison against what was previously identified if it has no environmental clearance. So my question is, should the VMT analysis have been looked at just as a basis for what is the impact on the neighborhood, what is the impact on VMT? And I suspect if it was looked at that way, it would not be less than significant, because that less than significant threshold, based on my reading of the document, was based on the comparison to how it was previously zoned. So those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to speak on this item? Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and invite the applicant back to the podium to provide any further comments.
For the record, Marcus LaDuca again. I'd like to address a few of the comments. At first, I would like, it touches on one of the comments just made, but also gets to the question from Chairman Jensen earlier. SB 330 was not just this provision regarding no loss of residential capacity. It affected quite a number of statutes, some of which have been in existence for 40 years. And what it did really was remove a great deal of discretion from local government in certain circumstances. For example, if you have a property, let's say this property, the 168 units that are allowed, yes, it still must undergo CEQA review. However, when you get a project application in now, under the Housing Crisis Act, there's a series of determinations. First, you have to determine if the application is complete. It can only be compared to standards, adopted standards, objective standards in effect at the time the application is submitted. Then, once it's deemed complete, and there's 19 categories of information that you look at, you don't get to have multiple rounds of adding new items of why it's not complete. Once you deem it complete, the city or county has 30 days to determine whether it is consistent with adopted plans, programs, policies, and standards. Objective policies, programs, standards, ordinances of the jurisdiction in effect at the time the application was deemed complete. If you deem it consistent, the density is consistent, it meets setback requirements for homes that will be built, then your discretion becomes extremely limited. You can not deny or reduce the number of units on that site unless there are objective, identifiable health and safety impacts that cannot otherwise be mitigated. The discretion, at least from the courts we've seen so far, is that's a pretty narrow discretion that the jurisdiction has. It can't be just that I don't want to see these trees cut down. That's not objective. It has to be something that goes to health and safety, flooding, drainage, such traffic impacts that create health and safety standards. That's it. So the idea that the 168 unit, a project of that sort, had not gone through environmental review, the state's taken away a lot of the city's discretion on that. On the issue of the environmental review, and you don't get to violate CEQA and other environmental requirements, that's true. You don't. CEQA is an informational document. It doesn't tell you shall do something. It's an informational document. And so, as you saw with the attachments to the combined CEQA document, both the addendum to the Sierra Vista EIR and the mitigated negative declaration for the Sierra View property, there was I think 16 studies that were attached to that. Archaeology, biology study, cultural report, all those things that go into that, a traffic analysis, an air quality greenhouse gas analysis, a vehicle miles traveled analysis that looked at all those aspects. That is substantial evidence in the record. Someone saying that you're violating CEQA is not evidence of any kind. It is not substantial evidence. You can only make a decision and make findings presented to you by your staff based on the evidence in the record. What that evidence showed in terms of that environmental review, and staff did a very thorough job in their response to the letter that was submitted in biological resources. Again, there are requirements under the mitigation measures for pre-construction surveys. Those are standard throughout the state of California relative to special status species, birds under the Migratory Bird Act. But again, it has to do with certain specified species, and it is not asking you to say you have to therefore mitigate land around a nest. You have to have a setback during construction if a nest is found, but it is not for all bird species. It's for bird species that have special status. The Bio 2, mitigation measure Bio 2, has those construction surveys for protected special status birds that are set forth there that we will have to comply with, that projects all over the city comply with. As for wetland, riparian, woodland, again, there was a low likelihood of any habitat for special status species, but again, standard requirement that's been in existence in the city of Roseville since the early 80s when the Corps of Engineers issued their first regulations under the Clean Water Act is you cannot have grading construction activity on the site until such time as you have obtained all federal and state approvals from California Department of Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Environmental Protection Agency, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We know that. The West Park folks have been dealing with this for the 30-plus years they've been developing in Roseville. On greenhouse gas, again, a tech memo was done on vehicle miles traveled. The city has to calculate vehicle miles traveled for the city of a whole. That's one of the requirements. It has that, and then you do look, unlike most of CEQA, you do look to see when you have a change in a site what the vehicle miles traveled were in the adopted general plan and in the EIR for the Sierra Vista specific plan, which has been done. And again, you show that you have over 11,000 fewer trips. I mean, the number of trips and therefore the number of vehicle miles traveled, greenhouse gas emissions, reactive organic gases, oxides of nitrogen are all greatly reduced. But in terms of vehicle miles traveled, you would see a great reduction of that, particularly since you have a commercial site a half mile away that if it develops, residents here won't have to drive halfway across Roseville like many people in the West area do now, but we'll have a commercial site down the street. In terms of the allegation regarding creating a retention basin, the staff memo pointed out what happened relative to testing on the site and borings that were done in terms of the geological or geotechnical analysis of the project to be able to know what the soils were, because that's another part of the secret disclosures, to know what soils you have, what's there, and that's what was done. There was no all drainage being removed. There was no patterns that were being fundamentally changed, and there certainly wasn't a retention basin or detention basin being created on the site. That's what was involved here. West Park is very well, again, been working with CEQA for probably 35 years of their principals working on projects. And again, they know they have to send out their consultants to do test bores to be able to finish the analysis so that your staff can issue a negative or an environmental document. In terms of the other comments, I think that covers the comments that were made. Again, I'd be happy to answer any questions that the commission might have.
Commissioners have any questions of Mr. Leduca? Thank you, Marcus. I'll go ahead and close the public comment period and close the public hearing. Derek or Greg, I'm looking at the questions that we got related to the environmental review, and I know Marcus walked through those quite a bit. Is there anything you'd like to add to that specifically?
I think just to tag on to Marcus's comments on the VMT, whether the site has had environmental review, you have to recall that we updated our general plan in 2019. And at that time, that's when we adopted the VMT, because that's a relatively new requirement from the state, is for the city to use VMT analysis in CEQA. So we adopted VMT policies. We did a pretty robust VMT analysis for the city using the city's traffic model. So this site has a base. There is a baseline VMT analysis via the general plan EIR that was adopted in 2019. So that's why the reduction is counted against, is that number. So it's similar to what Marcus is saying. But I just want to make sure that you recall it's a fairly recent information. So when you're looking at this project's VMT versus what could be built on the site, regardless of whether there was site-specific environmental review, there was general plan level environmental review done on VMT. I'd also like to point out that I think there might be some confusion. There was a mention of the 6th EIR. You have to recall the environmental document that is prepared for this project is a combination of two environmental documents. There is an initial study and mitigated negative declaration for the Sierra View subdivision. And that is a project-specific environmental review for Sierra View, where you can, it's as Marcus said, there's dozens of pages or more than dozens, hundreds of pages that support that with technical studies. There's also an addendum to the Sierra Vista specific plan. That addendum is specific to the WB40, WB30, WB41 project. And that is an independent analysis of that project. So I know the one commenter mentioned the balancing of SB 330. That's what that section of the environmental document means, is you're balancing out the environmental review by, it kind of forces us to do two different environmental reviews. Each project has its own independent environmental review that are, for lack of a better term, sandwiched together and combined. So I think it's important to note that there isn't any confusion. We're not violating CEQA. We've basically, we've done everything we would have done if these two projects had been independent of each other. If SB 330 did not exist, the mitigated negative declaration for Sierra View would have been what we would bring to you. The addendum for WB41 is what we would have brought to you. So all of the work we normally do on every project in the city has been done for these two projects. It's just this kind of anomaly that because of the requirement to transfer the units, we've had to merge it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Does the commission have any further questions regarding that item? Ma'am, the public comment period is closed. So with that, I'd look to the commission for any further questions to staff or comments? And we'll start at this end. This time, Commissioner Brashears.
I don't have any questions at this time.
Commissioner Caparuso.
I don't have any questions. There's just some conversations that we had earlier this week with staff that I wanted to bring to light in regards to, I'm in favor of the project. I will relay my concerns back to the transfer of the units and the precedent that it's sort of setting in this situation in which we've been forced. And so I just wanted to get that out there. But I do think that this is a solution to a very unique situation that we potentially won't find again in the city. So, but I did want to make that clear.
Commissioner Martin.
Okay, a couple of things, I guess. So Jane had passed out some pictures just so everybody's aware that are in front of us, with her explanation to state that they had dug some holes to create a possible retention area. Based upon the pictures, I can't determine if that's the same location or if it's a different location where the water is landing at compared to where the second picture is. The perspectives don't match and the trees don't match. So I'm sorry I can't agree with your pictures, but
Or the power line.
or the power line. No, I'm sorry.
The public comment period is
Closed. But I just can't make that determination from these pictures. So I appreciate your comments and I understand your concerns, but I can't physically make that determination from these pictures. So, and I don't know if there's on the truck, the work truck, if there's a name of a geotech firm or not. That would clarify whether it was doing some borings. And then in regards to, there was a question about the general zoning, and then so I don't know, we didn't really address that one. The general zoning with the reduction of housing, I guess we kind of did, didn't we? We kind of addressed that. Yeah, never mind. So I guess I'll just raise this question. My main concern is the switch, just to piggyback onto what Commissioner Caparuso said, of the commercial, changing the commercial. I see something on a plan and I feel like we only have so many marbles of these community commercials and we're losing marbles. And this, I understand the SB 330 and whatnot and the reason for this. I want to keep my marbles. And so that's just why I'm bringing that concern and question up here. And I totally agree with Kenny's proposal about the half-mile away of the other commercial site, and it makes perfect sense. I'm just trying to keep the marbles I saw on the page, and maybe I shouldn't be holding on to that, and I should be looking at how we're solving the problem. The years you guys have spent on this to solve this problem has been insane amount of work for you guys, and you've taken a situation where you've looked at all of the adjacent residential for this infill area. You've listened to them. You've modified the project. You've made it a project that's workable. You're making it more environmentally friendly by removing less trees and meeting other guidelines. And you're using a space that is shown in a report to have a highest and best use of residential. So you're swapping out areas. Very complicated, very complex, and it's solving solutions and allowing us to move forward with residential placement and moving things around. So that's all I have, I guess.
Mr. Pryor.
I have no questions at this time.
Mr. Hagen-Yost.
First of all, I want to commend staff for all the work that you have done on all of this. I started reading this material on a beach in Cancun and right after my niece's wedding, and I had a whole bunch of time in an airplane. And you're absolutely right. There is a tremendous amount of material that helps us understand why this makes sense. What I kept thinking about was we are living in a world that is changing. And as much as all of us would love for big box stores and grocery stores to do what we want, their world is changing as well. And you know, am the pastor at St. John's right across from the village center, and I've watched for years how it took these folks to work with different people to try to make something happen. And so part of what I'm encouraged about is the creativity that perhaps will make some of the commercial space that's planned for out there more competitive, have more potential. By giving up a little here, maybe we open up other space that would take further time to develop. And I also, in terms of the CEQA document and reading all of that, I'm convinced that in those areas where there is mitigation needed, that the appropriate agencies and the appropriate people who govern all of that will work to make sure that those mitigation efforts take place. And so any concerns that I might have had, I don't anymore. So I just wanted to offer those comments.
Thank you. I just have a couple of comments. First of all, I want to thank the public for attending the meeting, and for the public that was involved in the prior meetings regarding the project, because I do think it resulted in a much better project than having 168 units on site. And that wouldn't have been possible if we didn't have a developer that had control over other property that allowed for that transfer of units to occur. And going back to my initial comments, it gave staff much more flexibility in looking at design to make sure that the least amount of impacts to the community occurred as a result of that. And so, I'm grateful that all of those things came together to put, in my opinion, what is a good project. I appreciate your comments regarding the environmental review. I think that it was thorough. I think all of the impacts that would occur as a result of the project were identified, and mitigation was proposed to reduce those to less than significant. So I'm comfortable with the environmental analysis. And I do think in the end, this is probably the best project that can occur on this site. And I think it solves a lot of concerns that the residents have. So with that, I'll look to the commission for a motion.
Should we pull up the slide? Chair Jensen, if I may, if it would help the commission, we could pull up the last slide with all of the entitlements. And the motion could be by reference instead of maybe one back, Stephanie, not quite that far. Yeah.
That actually would be very good for them.
Instead of reading all of that, whatever the commissioners desire, but.
And I'm assuming, Joe, that works fine?
Yeah.
To do. Okay. Can we have an emotion for Commissioner to approve the action on the screen?
I'll make a motion to approve the action that's on the screen currently for the recommendation.
Mr. Martin has made the motion. Is there a second? Mr. Hagan-Yost has made a second. Roll call.
Commissioner Pryor.
Yes.
Vice Chair Martin.
Yes.
Commissioner Brashears.
Yes.
Commissioner Caparuso.
Yes.
Commissioner Hagan-Jost.
Yes.
And Chair Jensen.
Yes. So the motion is approved. There is a 10-day appeal period for this item, and it will be going to council. So there's another hearing regarding this item as well, so you can raise those same issues with the council for final approval. Okay, so next on the agenda is Commissioner and Staff Reports, and item 7.1 is an informational presentation on Senate Bill 9, and I see Lauren coming forward.
I do have a presentation for this item, a PowerPoint, that is.
We'll give a second for folks to clear out, and then we'll go ahead and start.
Yeah.
This is super interesting. They should stay.
Yeah, but nobody's interested in this one.
I'm interested.
All All right, good evening, Chair and members of the Commission. My name is Lauren Hawker, Senior Planner, and I'm here to give you an informational update on some changes we are proposing to make to the zoning ordinance and the subdivision ordinance in response to Senate Bill 9 and in response to an affordable housing streamlining program that was part of the recently adopted housing element. So to begin, let's talk about some Senate Bill 9 basics. The Senate bill will be effective on January 1st, 2022. And in general, what it does is it says that residential lots in a single-family zone are now permitted to have 2 primary units per lot, and that lot can have a ministerially approved 2-lot parcel map. Only one ministerially approved 2-lot parcel map, though. You can't take a lot and split it and then split it and then split it. And if you own multiple adjacent lots, you can only split one of those using the SB 9 process. So this table shows the criteria that have to be met to do each of those things, have 2 units and have a 2-lot ministerial parcel map. This is a very simplified table. There are a bunch of caveats to this, but in general, you can't demolish or alter occupied housing in order to get your second unit. Like if there isn't room on the parcel for 2 units, you can't alter or demolish one of an existing occupied house on the site to get your second unit. It also can't...
Chair, can I ask a question before we get off?
Sure.
Oh, okay. Because I didn't want to get too far along. For clarification, if you are a property owner that owns several adjacent properties, you can only split one property?
That's correct. Through this process. Obviously, you can use the standard parcel map process, but only one of those properties can be split using Senate Bill 9. And the idea behind this is that Senate Bill 9 was intended to provide additional long-term housing, and it was intended to provide this option for individual property owners, not developers, right? And so they were trying to write it in such a way that it would help single property owners as opposed to helping developers who have, the funding to have standard parcel maps.
That's a good question. I didn't understand that.
And I'd like to point out one thing in addition to what Lauren said in your example. So if you own multiple adjacent properties, you can use Senate Bill 9 to subdivide one of those, to do the ministerial lot split on one of those properties, and be able to use the development standards in Senate Bill 9 for one of those properties. So the reduced setbacks, the reduced lot size, for instance, if you use Senate Bill 9 on one parcel, you have an adjacent parcel. Well, if you want to subdivide that parcel, you have to meet all of the city's subdivision design standards. So minimum lot size, setbacks, so all of the typical standards apply. So just to make sure. So it'd be much harder. So for instance, if you own 2 6,000 square foot single-family lots next to each other, could use Senate Bill 9 to get the ministerial lot split on one, build a couple parcels on it. The adjacent one, you can't subdivide because you can't have 2 lots that meet our lot standards.
Right.
So preclude you from doing that. So while it's hypothetically possible if you owned several large parcels, based on the city of Roseville's development standards, I think it'd be very, very unlikely that we would ever see somebody able to meet our standard to do a SB 9 lot split and then on an adjacent parcel do a normal lot split.
And what I would say is that's not because we have unreasonably high standards.
No.
It's because we have, generally speaking, smaller lots in the city. We don't have a bunch of 1-acre lots sitting around, right? So.
Yeah.
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry for the interruption.
Can I just have
This
one?
is information.
Hey, it's a workshop, so.
Question on that. So you talk about the lots being adjacent. So say you have the same person and he owns 3 lots and they're not adjacent to each other and they're on opposite sides of the town. They would have the ability then on each one of those individual lots, it's tied to be the adjacency, not the ownership.
That is my understanding.
Okay.
Yes.
We do have that occupied. But anyway,
yeah. Okay.
There are some nuances.
Yes, with an asterisk.
Yeah, that's why I was saying there are a whole bunch of caveats to this, all of these things, but yes.
Because all the caveats are trying to detract from what we were just getting at.
And the caveat specifically when we joke about the asterisks, is there is an owner occupancy requirement for a minimum of 3 years. So if you had those 3 lots, if you weren't living on one of them, it would have an issue with the owner occupancy requirement.
That makes sense.
Is there a occupancy
every 3
definition, like 51% of the year? Like out of state, I mean, that's a
Decade, you've got them all
There's
divided.
there's no, that isn't clear.
That level of detail is not in there.
okay.
So also to have your second home, the property can't be in a historic district or on a historic register, and there are a bunch of listed environmental constraints that can't be present, like it can't be a hazmat site, right? And then for the 2-lot parcel map, it has all of the same requirements as the criteria for 2 units, but in addition to that, the created lots have to be approximately equal in size. It's a 60-40 split is the maximum. And then they also have to be at least 1,200 square feet each, is the other thing. Now, for the 2 units, most of our development standards do apply to that, but we'll get into that in a bit. All right, so then moving on to the housing element program. So Housing Element Program 16, we actually had really positive feedback on this program when we were going through Housing Element adoption. This is called the Prioritize Affordable Housing Program. And what we did was we committed to streamlining voluntary mergers, lot line adjustments, and parcel maps, this time not just 2-lot, 4 or fewer lots, and parcel maps for affordable housing projects by allowing those to be ministerial rather than requiring planning entitlements for qualified affordable housing projects. So that's at least 20% of the units need to be for low, very low, or extremely low income households to be a qualifying project. And the reason we were looking at doing this is because we've all seen affordable housing projects come through where there were multiple small lots that needed to be merged, or there was a lot line that needed to be adjusted, or it's a larger site and it needs to be phased for financing purposes, so they want to split it into 2 or even 3 lots. So it's relatively common. And meanwhile, we now have the city's objective design standards process, and that allows ministerial design review for qualifying affordable housing projects. So it sets up a situation where you may have an affordable housing project that can go through ministerial design review, but still needs a planning entitlement because they have to move a lot line a little bit. So by going through this and adding this to our subdivision ordinance, we further streamline affordable housing projects. So let's talk about the kinds of amendments we're talking about making for this. So we need to amend both the zoning ordinance and the subdivision ordinance. For the zoning ordinance, again, this is simplified, but we'd be looking at the residential development standards table. That's where it says how many units you can have on each lot, depending on the zoning. We would be changing the standards for the R1 standard single family zone and the RS residential small lot, single family zone, to indicate you can have 2 primary units in those zones, with a footnote telling you to go to the development standards that apply to have that second unit. So there are a couple of standards that we'll need to be adding in there. One is that the setbacks for the second unit are the same as they are actually for an ADU. So it's 4-foot side and rear yard setbacks. We can require 1 off-street parking space. Caveat again, if it's near high-quality transit, then we can't. There's another circumstance where we can't as well. And it also prohibits, SB 9 prohibits short-term rental, because again, this is about permanent long-term housing. It is not trying to enable vacation homes.
Lauren, can I jump in on that one too?
Yep.
Okay, so it prohibits short-term rentals on the second, not property, second.
Any home that you
unit.
use the SB 9 provisions in order to build. Yeah.
So if you use the SB, but if you have 2 homes on a lot, you have an existing, and you build a second structure.
I believe it would only apply to that second unit. That is my understanding. So one of the things I was going to say at the end of the presentation that I'll say now is we have a draft of all of these edits. They are going through review right now, and there are all these little nuances that we have to think through. So this is our understanding right now, but when we finish all of our sort of detailed review of the edits, we may be like, hang on.
Yeah.
And to answer that, again, it depends, specifically your question
Yes.
on what's done. So what the actual law says is a local agency shall require that a rental of any unit created pursuant to this law cannot have a rental term that is less than 30 days. So the idea being, if you have one house and create a second house, you couldn't rent in the second house. But if you have a vacant lot and you use that vacant lot to build 2 homes, both those would be new rental units. Now, there is still the issue with regard to the owner occupancy, but at some point in time after 3 years, that goes away. But there isn't that same temporal restriction on the short-term rental. So the logical conclusion would be that if you created 2, even if you lived in one for 3 years and then after that tried to rent it, you wouldn't be allowed to rent it on a short-term basis because it's a rental unit created by virtue of SB 9.
Yeah, okay.
Fun.
So can I just ask another clarifying question?
Sure.
If you built that second unit, split the lot, built the second unit, then moved into that second unit yourself, could you rent out the original unit short-term? Because it's not created, or?
I think I would argue that was that second, by virtue of this, you created a rental unit by virtue of your first unit. So that wording is create a rental unit. It doesn't say build it from scratch. So if you built one and moved over, I would argue you've created a rental unit in your first one by doing that.
What I will say about all of this is shades of the ADU conversations, right? Meaning that you pass a law and it's the first version of it, and then everybody starts talking about, well, what does that mean exactly? And then there are corrections that come out and additions made to the law. So there are nuances where you get to where it's like nobody thought about that. So somebody makes an interpretation and then somebody else decides that's not the way they wanted people to interpret it, and an amendment to the law is made. Okay. So other than those standards I just said, all of the other development standards of the city apply. However, just like with ADUs, there is a minimum allowance requirement, meaning if our standards preclude somebody from building at least 2 800 square foot units, then we have to allow that. We have to waive our standards to make sure they can at least build 2 800 square foot units. For the subdivision ordinance, we will be touching multiple sections. We'll be revising the lot line adjustment and voluntary merger section to reflect a ministerial process for qualified affordable housing projects. And then a new or revised ministerial parcel map section to reflect a new process for 2 lot parcel maps pursuant to SB 9 and 4 or fewer lots pursuant to the process for affordable housing projects. And then also some revisions to notice and hearing requirements and approval authority. So, status and next steps. We kind of talked about this. We have already a first draft of the amendments. They are being reviewed right now by city staff. We're hoping to get that all together. And then we would hope to get this to public hearings in the first quarter of next year because, of course, the law goes into effect January 1st. So if we start to get applications, we need to implement it, and it would be best to have this on the books as quickly as possible so that it's clear. Now, one of the things we will be doing also is as soon as we get the draft of the ordinances in good shape, we will also be developing internal procedures and application forms and that kind of thing. For these ministerial processes, we are currently envisioning it looking a lot like the objective design standards process, which means that somebody would actually apply for like a zoning clearance through planning. Planning would verify they qualify for one of these processes, and only then would the application go to engineering or to building.
Quick question. In those scenarios, there wouldn't be a public hearing then as long as they met those objective design standards.
That is correct.
I'm looking as a comparison the downtown specific plan where we have design guidelines, but someone could request that it goes to a hearing.
Correct. Yeah. So the minor design review permit is not considered a ministerial approval for the downtown in the downtown. So yeah, we post a public hearing, or we post a notice of intent to approve on the property, and a third party can ask for a hearing.
So on this one,
this other one, there will not be the opportunity, much like the objective design standards.
Yeah, it will be an engineering permit or a building permit, or both.
Yeah. So I'm assuming when this comes forward with the ordinance, and I know that we're kind of forced into some of these things, there'll need to be some kind of outreach to the community. I don't know how often this will actually occur. I'm assuming once we have an ordinance in place, we can probably get an idea of areas where this might happen. But just so the public is aware when something like, if it does.
Yeah, and on that note, we aren't expecting this to be very common. I mean, if we use
Doesn't sound like it would be.
ADUs as like a litmus test, we've seen more than we have before. We would see, say, 2 a year before all the legislation on ADUs was passed, but, it's bumped up to 8 a year. It's not a huge increase. And so if we're seeing 8 ADUs a year, this is still going to be more expensive, more costly than an ADU, right? Because if you build an ADU, you get lowered fees, right? Building permit fees. You don't get that for a second primary unit. Our standard fees apply to all of this. There are no fee reductions as part of this legislation. So it is less costly to have a second unit by virtue of an ADU than it is to have a second primary unit.
Got it.
Yeah, all impact fees, connection fees, et cetera, would apply. So it's the full package. And I can give you just an observation. We have one property owner who's already contacted us, and we looked at the site. He has a legal nonconforming. There's 2 homes on a R1 zoned lot here just north of the railroad tracks. And we pulled up the aerial. We looked at the lot size. 2 nice smaller homes on one lot. It's the ideal. It doesn't look like there's actually room for them to build any more than that. So they would never realize 4 units or 3 units on this. They just wouldn't be able to do it. They could put a lot line down the middle between the 2 homes, create 2 single family lots. So there wouldn't. The only difference is now you'd have 2 lots that could be sold independently. I think that probably is more likely to happen, especially when you start looking at the costs.
Yeah, and just looking at the older area of the city, I know a lot of those lots are 150 feet deep.
Yes.
And so that does have those large backyards. It might lend itself to that. We're in the
especially
newer
alley
areas
access,
where you have the home sitting basically in the middle of the lot.
Yeah.
That really precludes any ability to do any of this.
Yeah, we think the western portion of town would be almost virtually impossible. I don't know that there's hardly any lots that you could do that.
Yeah, especially because there are either small lots because they're MDR lots or they're maximized, right?
So the headlines when this was approved that all of a sudden every single family lot is now going to have 4 homes on it was a little hyperbole.
Well, that's why I was hearing this, and I know Justin brought this up earlier.
Yeah.
To have a discussion and understanding, at least to the level we can right now, if we're asked the question, that we can provide some direction or feedback to folks. But I appreciate your efforts on this, Lauren. You just finished the regional housing needs, and you got thrown right back into something just as fun. So, is there any other questions of Lauren? Is that the end of your presentation?
That is the end of my presentation.
So you're saying the advantage is that you can sell the second lot, but you have to wait 3 years before you can do that? You have to live in the primary one for 3 years?
If you live on one of the lots, I mean, you have to
That's if you build a second unit.
Can you sell both straight away?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
If you sell both straight away, do the regulations and restrictions transfer with the ownership so that new owner who just bought both
cannot ever subdivide those 2 lots again? No,
Yes.
that's once
short-term rent.
Once the original lot is, all those provisions.
Yeah. Speaking of procedures,
Right,
making sure we're tracking that.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right.
Okay, and so there's no action on this, so no need to open for public comment
Other
or
than
anything?
thank you, Lauren.
Yes, thank you, Lauren. Okay, Greg, any comments?
Just
for the
a couple
commission, or-
quick items. We will not be having a meeting on January 13th. We will be having a meeting on the 27th. We have some items teed up, so give you an extra break for the New Year's. And then I don't know, to be honest, I don't recall if I announced this at our last meeting, but we did get a letter from the Housing and Community Development Department. Did I mention this already?
Yeah.
Certifying the housing element. Oh, it's such a big thing.
I
that
don't
I'll
think you
mention
were
it
here
twice.
though, Lauren.
58
Congratulations.
p.m. or something like that, right?
That's right, it was the 2 minutes before meeting.
Yes.
Yeah, at 4:58 with several caveats, and I think the letter said we begrudgingly certify your housing element. And we do know there are several jurisdictions in the region that have not gotten that letter.
Ooh, yeah. Yeah.
So
They're going to have to go back to,
Any other comments or
I think that's all I have
questions from the
tonight.
commission?
I just have one request, and I brought this up to Chair Jensen, and I brought it up to Greg as well. If it would be possible, I know it's very challenging for us to find a date for a tour, and we tried to do this a couple years ago when I was chair, and COVID hit. And
Yeah.
there's just been,
that was fun.
So it would just be a request if we could somehow make it happen. Would be great in the spring.
Yeah. Oh, I was thinking we'd look for maybe a date in July or August. But no, yeah. Wait, Lupi and I.
Welter.
So if I can get a commitment that this wonderful commission will be flexible on dates, I think that was the trouble the last time.
Sure. Yeah.
Is I think we is the
And
most
responsive,
we got
flexible
like
and
three.
responsive.
You have my commitment.
Okay. So just so that any of the new Commissioner Hagenius, maybe, I don't know if Commissioner Pryor, maybe you two and Commissioner Covington. So we've done we've had tours of the city, trying to go look at some development sites, some sites that you've recently approved under construction, just to get an idea of what's going on. If you drive out to the end of Blue Oaks Boulevard, it blows my mind, and you know I know what's going on. We try and give a little tour of the city just to see what's going on, and then maybe some upcoming sites, give you an idea of what we're looking at. It's typical that we try and do it. We shoot for a morning, like a Friday morning, 9 o'clock. We come in here, we open the meeting, we jump on a bus, drive around for a couple hours, and then get back here before noon. So yeah, we'll look at any Friday in March, April, or May, I guess.
Census of the commission to
have
do
the
this?
tour? Oh,
Yes.
I believe.
Yeah.
Well, the
Yeah, I
last
think
tour
it's-
I'm aware of is prior to me actually being on the commission. I was part of leadership at that time, so this was years ago. Lots happened since then.
Yeah.
Greg, you have a commitment from all of us that will be responsive on replying to
I appreciate
potential
that.
dates.
I appreciate that. I know, Loopy, the last time we went through like 7 dates, and then by the time we picked one,
Is there
The
anything,
world-
any way you can do those calendars where you can
yes.
pick?
Doodle poll.
Yeah,
Do a
do
doodle poll or something,
idea.
yeah.
I love doodle polls.
No, I appreciate you. I know it's a heavy lift, and I think it's great for newer commissioners who have not done it, but also selfishly, I want to do it before I leave.
He just wants to.
July 1st?
Exactly. Be appreciative just to be guided in that way, because I did
Yeah.
try to actually drive around out in the west and ended up with a bunch of orchards.
we'll keep you out of the orchards.
Any other comments or questions? Well, I just have one last one. It's almost Christmas, so I think the entire commission wishes all of staff a Merry Christmas, and I appreciate
you.
all that you do.
And yeah, we definitely reciprocate that. We hope you all have a wonderful Christmas and New Year's, and we'll be back at it.
Okay? Until next year. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
All in favor? Aye. We're adjourned.